Imagine standing in battle against an army that never seems to shrink. One man falls, and instantly another takes his place. No matter how many die, their numbers always stay the same: 10,000. These were the Immortals, the feared elite of the Persian Empire. To their enemies, they looked eternal, unstoppable. But who were they really? When we talk about the beginning of the Immortals, we must first talk about Cyrus the Great. He was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire in the 6th century BC, and he is remembered as one of the most skilled rulers of the ancient world. Cyrus was not only a conqueror, but also a thinker. He knew that if he wanted to build a strong and lasting empire, he needed more than temporary victories. He needed an army that could fight any time, anywhere, and under any conditions. At that time, most armies were made of farmers and townspeople, who fought only when called. Once the campaign was over, they went back to their fields. Cyrus saw the weakness in this system. If he wanted to rule over vast lands and many different people, he needed a permanent and professional military force. This need became very clear during his great campaigns. In 539 BC, Cyrus captured Babylon, one of the richest and most powerful cities of the ancient world. Babylon was famous for its massive walls, strong army, and long tradition of resisting foreign rulers. Yet Cyrus managed to take it and add it to his growing empire. After this victory, he realized even more strongly that an empire of such size could not be held together without a permanent core of soldiers who were loyal only to him. Out of this idea, the Immortals were born. At first, the Immortals began as a palace guard. Like many kings before him, Cyrus wanted the best warriors close to him at all times, not only to protect his life, but also to show his power. Ancient writers like Xenophon describe how Cyrus surrounded himself with spearmen, who marched on both sides of him whenever he travelled. These guards were no common soldiers. They were chosen from the strongest, bravest, and most disciplined soldiers in the army. From this personal guard, the idea grew into something larger and more permanent. The guard of the king slowly transformed into a professional elite corps that would not only stand by him, but also fight at the very front of his battles. There is some debate among historians about who exactly created the Immortals as a fully organized unit. Some sources credit Cyrus himself, while others tell the story of a remarkable woman commander named Pantea Arteshbod. According to later traditions, Pantea was trusted by Cyrus to govern Babylon after its conquest, and she is sometimes said to have organized the first version of this elite guard. We cannot be completely certain of the details, but what matters is that under Cyrus's leadership, this group of warriors gained a permanent and central place in the Persian army. One of the most important features of the Immortals was their fixed number. There were always exactly 10,000 of them. If a man was killed, badly wounded, or became too sick to serve, another soldier was immediately chosen to take his place. This way the unit was never seen as weak or reduced. To both allies and enemies, they appeared constant, unbroken, and eternal. But the number 10,000 was not chosen by chance. In Persian culture, it had a special meaning. 10,000 was seen as the symbol of completeness and perfection. It was a number linked to the divine order of the world. By keeping this unit at exactly that strength, Cyrus was not just creating a strong military force, he was also sending a message. The Immortals were not ordinary men. They were meant to represent the power of the empire itself, an image of something that could not be diminished. In their early years, the Immortals were far more than guards who stood in a palace. They became the tip of the spear in Persian expansion. When Cyrus led his armies to new lands, the Immortals were often the first to march, the first to fight, and the first to break enemy defences. Their presence at Babylon, and later in the campaigns of Cambyses II and Darius I, made them both feared and admired. They were the king's shield and sword at the same time. They showed that the Persian Empire had both the will and the means to hold its conquests together. But who were the men chosen for this special role, and how were they prepared to serve in such an elite force? To understand this, we have to look at the way boys in Persia were raised. Children did not spend their early years in school or at play. Instead, young Persians, especially those from noble or respected families, were trained from the very beginning to serve the empire. Recruitment into the Immortals was not open to everyone. Most came from Persian families through Cyrus, and later rulers also allowed some Medes and Elamites to join. Including these groups was a way to strengthen unity inside the empire. It showed that even former rivals could become part of the king's most trusted guard if they proved their loyalty and skill. The path towards becoming an immortal began at the age of 5. From this young age, boys were taught the essential skills that every Persian soldier needed. They practiced archery, which was the heart of Persian warfare. The bow was more than a weapon, it was a symbol of Persian power. A boy who could shoot arrows quickly and accurately was already seen as on the path to becoming a warrior. Alongside archery, they learned to ride horses. Horsemanship was vital in the vast lands of Persia, where fast movements across deserts, mountains, and plains could decide the outcome of battles. Hunting was also a central part of their training. It was not only for food but also for discipline and endurance. A young boy was expected to follow wild animals for long hours through any weather and terrain. This was meant to build both strength and patience. Endurance training was strict. Children were taught to survive with little food, to handle extreme heat and cold, and to continue marching or riding when exhausted. The idea was simple: if they could survive the hardest challenges as boys, they would not fail when the real tests came in war. At the age of 20, after 15 years of such preparation, the boys became full soldiers. This was the official start of their service. From then until the age of 50, they could fight, guard, and march as members of the army. Serving 30 years was not just a duty, but also an honor. When their service ended, they were not abandoned. Retired soldiers were given pensions and land. This ensured that even after leaving the battlefield, they remained respected members of society. The empire rewarded loyalty with security for the future, which made families proud to send their sons into the army. Life in training and in service created strong bonds between these men. They grew up together, faced the same hardships, and fought side by side. They built a powerful sense of brotherhood. Loyalty was not only to the king, but also to each other. Discipline was valued because it kept the unit strong, and disobedience was punished harshly. Every man had to trust the one next to him completely. Without that trust, the system of constant battle and replacement would not have worked. Being one of the Immortals was seen as one of the greatest honors in the empire. To join their ranks meant that a man had proven his courage, skill, and loyalty to the highest level. Families celebrated when one of their own earned a place among the 10,000, for it meant they had reached the very top of Persian society's military order. The Immortals were not only soldiers, they were symbols of Persian strength, chosen from childhood and forged by years of discipline. When the Immortals marched, the first thing that caught the eye was their armor. Ancient writers described their coats as being made of small metal plates that overlapped like the scales of a fish. This type of armor, called scale armor, was both strong and flexible. Each scale was carefully shaped to deflect blows while allowing the soldier to move freely. When thousands of Immortals stood together under the sun, their armor glittered brightly, creating the image of a wall of shining metal. This gave them a uniform appearance that set them apart from ordinary soldiers, who rarely had such equipment. The main weapon of the Immortals was the spear. Each man carried one about 6 feet in length, with a sharp iron head. What made these spears unique was the counterweight at the opposite end. These counterweights were both practical and symbolic. They balanced the spear in combat, making it easy to control, but they were also shaped and decorated in ways that showed rank. The most famous counterweights were in the shape of apples, which gave rise to the name apple bearers. Among the Immortals, the 1,000 soldiers who guarded the king most closely carried spears with golden apples, while the rest carried silver. This clear distinction reminded everyone of the special place these men held in the hierarchy of the empire. In addition to their spear, each man carried a bow and a quiver filled with arrows. Archery was central to Persian warfare, and the Immortals were trained to use their bows with accuracy and speed. This allowed them to fight from a distance, softening the enemy lines before close combat began. For hand-to-hand fighting, they carried a short sword called an asanasis. It was light, straight, and easy to use in close quarters, either for stabbing or cutting. With spear, bow, and sword, the Immortals were equipped for every stage of a battle. Their shields were also a distinctive feature. Instead of heavy bronze shields like the Greeks used, the Persians preferred wicker shields covered with leather. These shields were tall and rectangular, strong enough to block arrows, yet light enough to carry over long marches. Some sources also describe smaller round shields that were used when more mobility was needed. The design showed a balance between protection and flexibility, two qualities that defined the Persian approach to warfare. Beyond their armor and weapons, the Immortals stood out for their splendor. Herodotus and later writers noted how richly dressed they were compared to other soldiers. They wore embroidered robes over their armor, sometimes decorated with bright colors like purple and yellow. Gold jewelry and ornaments were often part of their appearance, especially in formal processions. This luxury extended beyond the battlefield. When they traveled, they were followed by caravans of covered wagons, camels, and mules. They carried not only food and supplies, but also their concubines, servants, and personal attendants. Each immortal had access to special food and comforts reserved for the unit alone. This mixture of discipline and display made the immortals stand out in every setting. They were soldiers, but also symbols of Persian wealth and power. Their shining scale armor, their apple-adorned spears, their bows and swords, and even the grand caravans that moved them all marked them as the elite of a prosperous empire. One of the most striking things about the Immortals was not only how they fought, but how they appeared to those who faced them. Ancient enemies believed these men could not be destroyed. The reason was simple. Whenever an immortal fell in battle, whether killed or wounded or too sick to continue, his body was removed from the field immediately and replaced at once by another. This meant the line of 10,000 never seemed to thin. Opponents never saw their losses, never saw a gap in their formation, and never witnessed weakness. To outsiders, it looked as though the same soldiers stood again and again, endless and unbroken. This practice gave rise to their famous name. The illusion was powerful. Imagine standing across the battlefield, watching your enemy fight for hours and realizing that their numbers never dropped. It felt as though you were fighting a wall that could not be pushed back. The Immortals seemed eternal, as though no matter how many times they were struck, they always returned. This sense of permanence was as frightening as their actual weapons. Their equipment also carried meaning that went far beyond practical use. The golden and silver counterweights on their spears, often shaped like apples or pomegranates, became one of the most recognizable symbols of Persian power. To see rows of spears tipped with shining ornaments was to know that the empire's most trusted soldiers were present. For the 1,000 men who guarded the king most closely, the counterweights were golden. For the others, they were silver. Both glittered in the sunlight and created an image of wealth and strength. To those who faced them, these details were not just decoration. They were reminders that the empire could afford to arm thousands of men with weapons that looked as precious as they were deadly. This psychological weight was often more effective than the clash of swords. In many campaigns, the presence of the Immortals was enough to convince cities to surrender without a single arrow fired. Stories spread quickly from place to place. If the Immortals marched into view, resistance was useless. This reputation saved Persian rulers time, resources, and lives. By relying on their image as an unbeatable unit, the Persians extended their empire not only through force, but also through fear. It is important to see that the Immortals were more than just soldiers. They were also living propaganda. Their perfect numbers, shining armor, and decorated weapons all worked together to send a message. The Persian king commanded order, wealth, and discipline on a scale no rival could match. When the Immortals guarded him in ceremonies, the people saw proof of his divine right to rule. When they marched in battle, they demonstrated the empire's strength in the most visible way possible. In both war and peace, their role was to make sure that the idea of Persian power was felt in the hearts of everyone who looked at them. Through these methods, the Immortals became a symbol not only of military skill, but also of psychological warfare. Their enemies did not just fight them on the battlefield, they fought against the fear that came before the first spear was even thrown. But with such power and reputation, another question naturally arises. If they seemed unstoppable, how did such a force meet its end? As we already mentioned, the Immortals were both the personal protectors of the king and the shock troops of the empire. Their double role meant they could serve in ceremonies at the palace one day and lead the attack in a major battle another. They were the best equipped and most trusted men of the empire, and rulers knew that when the Immortals marched, the outcome of a campaign often depended on them. Their first great victories came during the rule of Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus. In 525 BC, Cambyses launched an invasion of Egypt, one of the richest and most ancient kingdoms of the time. The Egyptian army, with its chariots and long tradition of warfare, was expected to put up a strong fight. But the Persians, with the Immortals at the center of their advance, managed to defeat them at the Battle of Pelusium. Ancient sources even tell the story of Persian soldiers using cats and other sacred animals to unsettle the Egyptians, though the details remain uncertain. What we do know is that the disciplined charge of the Immortals played a decisive role in breaking Egyptian resistance. With Egypt subdued, the Persians added another jewel to their empire. Not long after, the Immortals were present in the campaigns of Darius I. Around 518 BC, Darius moved his forces into the Indus Valley, bringing parts of modern-day Pakistan under Persian control. A few years later, in 513 BC, he led his armies north against the Scythians, the nomadic horsemen of the Eurasian steppe. These were not easy opponents. The Scythians avoided direct battle, retreating into the wide open plains. The Immortals were trained to fight in close formation, but even here they proved adaptable, supporting Darius's efforts to chase the elusive enemy and secure the empire's northern frontier. The true test of the Immortals, however, came in the great struggle between Persia and Greece. In 490 BC, Darius sent an expedition to punish Athens for supporting revolts against Persian rule. At the Battle of Marathon, the Persian army included the Immortals, who were expected to crush the Athenian defenders. Yet the Greeks fought in tight hoplite formation, with heavy bronze armour and large shields. When the two sides clashed, the Persian light equipment could not break through the Greek wall of spears and shields. Despite their skill, the Immortals could not overcome the advantage of Greek armour. The defeat at Marathon shocked the empire, proving that even its elite force could not guarantee victory in every situation. 10 years later, in 480 BC, Darius' son Xerxes launched a massive invasion of Greece. At Thermopylae, the narrow mountain pass was defended by King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, supported by other Greek allies. Xerxes first sent waves of Medes and Scythians, but they failed to break the defenders. Finally, he ordered the Immortals to attack. Their reputation was so great that even the Persians expected them to succeed where others had failed. The fighting was fierce, but the Spartans, with their heavier armour and longer spears, held their ground. Only when a hidden mountain path was revealed to Xerxes did the Immortals flank the Greeks from the rear. This manoeuvre finally forced the defenders into a hopeless position. The Immortals had not smashed through the front, but they had helped bring an end to the stand at Thermopylae. The following year, in 479 BC, the Immortals fought at Plataea, one of the largest battles of the wars. Here again they faced Greek hoplites, and once more their lighter equipment proved a weakness. The Greeks used their armour and discipline to hold the line, while the Persians struggled in close combat. Even the Immortals, with their training and courage, suffered heavy losses. The Persians were defeated, and the failure at Plataea marked the decline of their campaign in Greece. By this time, the Immortals had fought in many different lands, from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Greece. They had won victories and endured painful defeats, but one thing was certain: their presence was always at the heart of Persia's military efforts. They were the unit that carried the king's trust and the empire's pride. It was easy to see why people across the ancient world both respected and feared them. We've already mentioned their defeats against the Greeks. At Marathon, their lighter armour failed against the heavy hoplite shield wall, and at Plataea, they suffered great losses in close combat. These battles showed that even the most disciplined Persian unit could be held back by new tactics and stronger equipment. Yet the Immortals continued to serve the empire faithfully under Darius I and Xerxes I, standing as both royal guards and frontline soldiers. By the time Alexander of Macedon invaded Persia in the 4th century BC, the Immortals were still respected, but no longer seen as invincible. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC, they took their place once again near the Persian king, Darius III. Ancient accounts describe how they fought bravely, but Alexander's well-trained Macedonian phalanx and his fast-moving cavalry proved too strong. The Persians could not match the combination of Greek discipline and Macedonian speed. The Immortals, despite their long tradition, were forced to retreat with the rest of the army. The defeat marked the final blow to the Achaemenid Empire. What is striking is that Alexander himself admired them. He had grown up hearing about the famous 10,000, and he recognized the importance in Persian history. After his victory, he chose not to destroy every trace of them. Instead, he absorbed some of the Persian elite troops into his own guard. In this way, the Immortals left their mark even on the army of the man who conquered them. Their discipline and loyalty impressed Alexander, and he saw value in keeping their traditions alive within his new empire. Still, the original Immortals did not survive the fall of the Achaemenids. With the collapse of Persian rule after Gaugamela, their unique system of constant replacement and fixed numbers of 10,000 disappeared. Without the empire that had created and maintained them, the Immortals as an institution came to an end. What remained was their memory, carried forward by historians soldiers, and later rulers who looked back to their example. This memory proved powerful. Centuries later, the Sassananian Empire, which ruled Persia from the 3rd to the 7th century AD, created its own elite unit of heavy cavalry, sometimes called the Immortals. Though they were mounted troops rather than infantry, the name shows how deeply the legend of the original force had sunk into Persian culture. The echo did not stop there. In Europe, Napoleon's soldiers in the 19th century nicknamed his imperial guard the Immortals, a sign of how the ancient idea of an elite, unbreakable core still carried weight. Even in the 20th century, the last Shah of Iran formed a unit called the Javian Guard, literally the Immortal Guard, which was meant to connect modern Iran to its ancient imperial past. From the fall of Babylon to the fall of Persepolis, the Immortals had stood as the living symbol of Persian might. Though the original core vanished with the empire that created it, their legacy refused to die. Later rulers across continents and centuries reached for their name as a way to capture the same aura of discipline, loyalty, and eternal strength. So yes, the Immortals may have vanished with the fall of the Persian Empire, but their story has never truly died. From the ancient carvings at Persepolis to films like 300 and even video games, their image still fascinates us today. They became a legend and a symbol of loyalty, discipline, and the illusion of eternal strength. Have you ever heard of this Persian elite force before, and do you believe they deserve their place among history's most feared warriors? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.